So Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. How many podcasts have we done together now?
We've certainly done one on mine and one on yours.
So this is the third.
Yeah, I think this is the trilogy.
Yeah. So the first podcast I ever did in my life was that podcast I did on your channel.
Okay.
And now I think I was like bitten by a bug that day, and I've now done maybe I think altogether 40 podcasts or something. So you got me. You're the one that kind of got this whole party rolling.
That's a cool thing about podcasts, isn't it? Like I found, obviously the podcast is one of the first things in my career that sort of picked up. Like the Arabic in 60 Steps podcast was something that, I heard lots of people sort of in the social media space and stuff talking about how big audio is now. And I saw around me how many people were commuting and listening to podcasts and stuff. And so I just said, well, let's just do this for Arabic. Let's just make it something that people can consume on their commutes. And now here we are.
Amazing. And your Arabic in 60 Steps podcast that has like 500,000 hits or something, right?
Yeah, it's about 500,000 downloads right now. Yeah,
that's amazing. So the very first podcast you and I ever did on your channel was kind of on personal development, and then you came onto my podcast and we're talking about Islam and we're talking about spirituality and such. But the thing is, we're both language teachers and we haven't really spoken about language yet. So today we're going to talk about language. And for my viewers who don't know, you are from Britain, in England, and about 10 years ago you started learning Arabic to the point now that you're a very popular Arabic teacher. And so what I'd like to talk to you about today is like, what are some of the differences between Arabic and English? But maybe we'll just start with, what were some of the challenges for you when you decided to learn Arabic?
I suppose one of the biggest challenges was keeping the main thing in learning Arabic for me. Like, so many different people suggest different ways for you to study a language, make flashcards, do big mind maps, think about what kind of a learner you are, do verb conjugation tables, drill verb conjugations aloud, like all these different kinds of suggestions, when really the main thing is just interacting with the language on a daily basis. Like, I lost sight of that. Like, in some of my early assessments when I was doing my degree in Arabic, I didn't perform very well in them. Like, I passed and stuff, like I did okay, but compared to the other people who I thought I was going toe to toe with in class, like I didn't do anywhere near as well. And the difference is because I was spending my time on things that weren't so important, things around the peripheries of actually learning, like making flashcards, copying out verbs into verb tables and things like that. Whereas the main thing would have been just to interact with Arabic every day, would have been to actually just sit with sentences and try to figure out what does this mean and try to produce my own sentences, put myself in situations where I have to produce Arabic more quickly, like in conversations and stuff. And I neglected to do that a little bit. So I think keeping the main thing in all of the noise of language learning was probably the biggest challenge for me even then. Like, now it's way worse because now we've got the social media and language learning advice from all these different apps and stuff, and so many different teachers bothering you all the time. But even back then, I think for the language student, keeping the main thing, just having a love for interacting with the language directly is the thing that people really need to do. And it's something I struggled with for sure.
So see, with Arabic, the alphabet is totally different. The pronunciation is totally different. And it's kind of funny when you see someone who's an English speaker who's never spoken Arabic, and they try to read the Arabic words, but with the English alphabet. And similarly, like when you have Arabs who are not so good at English, which, some of my students, and they try saying English words, but they add in like an ayn or a kha, or these letters which don't exist in English. Was that, I suppose, intimidating for you at all, or like challenging going from the English alphabet to now seeing all these dwads and sods and such?
Definitely. I remember being really early in the program, and usually at the beginning of Arabic textbooks and stuff, there'll be like an Arabic alphabet. And I remember kind of having one hand in that page and having to flip back to it for like every single letter. But I remember that. Like, that's the trenches of learning at the beginning of Arabic for sure, But with Arabic and with many other languages, like Spanish included and others as well, are a lot more phonetic than English is. Like, if you learn to read and write English, I think you've probably learned one of the more challenging languages in terms of spelling. So sure. Like, Arabic is very phonetic. Like, even sometimes I think like we could do with some of the Arabic letters in our language. Like, for example, the letter ذال. ذال in English, we just write th for both th and the. Like, if I say the house, that's a ذال really.
Yep.
That's not a fair, like in the word think,
Yep.
right? But
Sure.
we express both of them with a th in English. And I think like in English, we could do with a then. We could do with letters that are, we could do with letters that are truer to actual pronunciation. Like I think I remember learning, like in English, we have something like 42 sounds, but only 26 letters. It's something like that. I can't
Yeah,
remember
sure.
exactly.
You know, you've actually just kind of given me a bit of inspiration. Maybe when I'm explaining to Arab students pronunciation, it can be a tha for like think, or it's a dal for that.
Yeah, exactly. Or even like, isn't one of the most common sounds in English, what's it called? Like at the end of the word doctor, for example, there's a word for that, like sound. That's a very, very common
Yeah.
sound.
I don't
Whatever
know.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever it is, right? Like when I was doing a course on learning how to teach English, I remember hearing that and thinking, well, we kind of have that in tajweed when we have a qalqala, like when you have like a b or a qa, there's like a little like sound on the end or in the middle of a word somewhere. And I thought, like, you know, we kind of Arabic script is very close to its pronunciation. It has things and rules within its script, whereas in English, we don't really have that privilege. And if you come from a background of learning to read and write English, you've probably done some of the hard bit, really.
Sure. I mean, like spelling in English is absolutely ridiculous. Like words like do or plow or though, or like, you know, then you have all these silent letters like sword. Why is there a W in sword? Or why is there a K in knife? Or why does phone start with a PH? You know, so it that I think would be very challenging for students. But here's a question for you. So see, for like a beginner student, and like for me, like I was a beginner Arabic student not too long ago, and because I grew up reading the Quran, I already knew the alif, ba, ta, tha. I grew up with that, and I think that made the learning journey much easier for me, because when it came to reading words, I already knew the letters, and I found that just to be a really big advantage. But how about for you? Well, one other thing I'll say is, when I was watching the Arabic teachers, some of them said, "Don't worry about learning the alphabet straight away." And I think their thought process behind it was, you know, you're going to look at this alphabet, it's going to be difficult, it's going to take time and be challenging. But how about for you? Do you think it's beneficial to learn the alphabet of a new language first?
So in my work, I really insist on students having a good command of the Arabic script before going into too much more. But that's because a lot of my work is focused around literature and texts. Like, so that's the reason. But I understand why in the teaching of colloquial languages, why that wouldn't be so important. Like there are lots of Arabic curriculums that don't use the Arabic script at all. They use transliterations for everything. Like if you do a course on Egyptian colloquial, or even if you buy one of the books from the colloquial series, I have the colloquial Bengali and I have the colloquial Somali books. And in those, well, Somali uses the Latin script anyway, but even in the colloquial Bengali book, it's entirely taught using transliterations. But it's because their objectives are colloquial. Like their objectives are to get students speaking as quickly as possible without having a hurdle of learning, you know, the Arabic text, or in my case, the Bangla text. So like that's that's the reason why there's a difference. And I don't sort of look down on either of them. They're just for their own specific purposes. But like the reason, like a reason why I'm so sort of strict on my students having some kind of command of the Arabic script before they start learning loads of vocab and grammar is, it's broken my heart in the past when I've had students who get to maybe like step 7 in my program, and then I see their notes and they're transliterating everything, like, or like they're getting to that stage and they've learned like a serious amount of grammar. They can express themselves and they can build sentences and things like that, but they're still right. They haven't got the Arabic script down yet. And I think like once you build those foundations, you can be practicing it forever. Like all of your Arabic notes forever will be better for it, for putting in that work in the very beginning. So that's why I'm all for it in the very beginning. Maybe I'm a little bit old school in that sense. But
no, I totally agree with you. I think it makes it when it comes to like
reading the goals of my program. Sorry to speak over you.
No,
it says the goals of my program though.
Yeah, and your program, for anyone who's listening, who should probably know this by now, but is the Arabic in 60 Steps program, in which Sam will take you right from the beginning of learning the script right to being able to understand what kind of text is it? Is it like
so at the end of the program, there's about 14 Arabic texts that I've chosen throughout sort of all of Arabic literature. We 2 of the lessons in there are the difference between the Qur'an from Mecca and the Qur'an from Medina. For those who don't know, like the Qur'an as a text was revealed over mainly two cities, Mecca being one of them, which is about a third of the Qur'an, about 2/3 are from Medina. And the way in which the Qur'an communicates to mankind is slightly different. Like the language between the two places is slightly different. Obviously, in one place in Mecca, the Muslims are a minority, that the Muslims are living in a non-Muslim land, and the purpose and the topics of the Qur'an are more around very like bigger concepts, things like the Day of Judgment, things like stories of the prophets, things like what monotheism is, or what we call tawheed. And then in Medina, the Muslims have a different challenge. In Medina, the Muslims have the challenge of establishing a state, of laying out rights and regulations and laws and policy and things like that. So in Medina, the Quran is quite different. It's not referring to those topics. It's generally chapters from Medina are much bigger and more detailed, and because they have to be, because the administrative demands from the Quran were different. So anyway, those are two. That's one of the texts we do. We do some Arabic poetry from different eras. Arabic poetry actually from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We do some poetry from the Middle Ages. There's a poet called Al-Mutanabbi, who's maybe one of the most iconic poets in all of Arabic literary history. And then some modern poetry as well. So we do some really beautiful, really, really nice texts. Like our students who graduate the program, they can really read and interact with some just incredible texts that you would never be able to enjoy if you didn't have the Arabic language. So it's really rewarding to teach and to mark those students' exams after they finish the program. That's probably some of the most rewarding work I do.
For anyone who's interested in doing some looking into Sam's course, your website's in the bio, so I recommend people go and check that out. It's not the only Arabic resource you have. You have a bunch of others, which I'll include the links for, including your YouTube channel. So anyone who is considering learning Arabic, I think they're actually at a loss without your program. It's like you're learning Arabic, but you don't have the Arabic in 60 steps. The amount people get for that program for the price is just outstanding. But here's another question for you. See, when like you speak Arabic as like as a white guy, or like are people ever shocked? For example, see recently I was out in the city centre, and a white Scottish guy starts talking to me in Arabic, and maybe just because I know you, it wasn't that shocking to me. But I was with my my Sudanese friend, and he was shocked to see a white guy talking Arabic, whereas I think it was less shocking for me because I've learned Arabic from you. So like I'm very used to seeing a white guy talk Arabic. Now, how about now when you speak Arabic or you speak Bengali? Is that ever like surprising to people?
When I try to speak Bengali, I'll put a disclaimer. I'm not like fluent in Bangla. Like like recently when I did the episode of Rerooted on the iEra YouTube channel, they put the Bengali flag as like one of the languages I speak, and they were very generous to put that. Like to say that I speak Bangla is pretty generous. But whenever I do reel off some Bangla for people, that's surprising. But with Arabic, it's more common that people speak Arabic to me in the masjid. Like I don't know. I never thought this before I became a Muslim. I never thought this, but some people seem to not think I'm quite as white as other white people. Like, with the Muslim context and with me being a little bit darker, like having a darker beard and darker hair, like people often just think I'm not entirely white. So
you might be Syrian or something.
Yeah, maybe. Like I've had people in the masjid when I used to live in Northampton and in Cornwall when we had people come to visit us and stuff. Like, I've had people come and speak, even non-Arabs, speak Arabic to me, thinking I was a Libyan, or thinking I was Lebanese or Syrian or something. But so no, not really.
You know, one thing I think is strange is that if you see a Chinese guy speaking English, it's not strange at all. If you see an African guy speaking English, nothing strange about it. You see a Polish person or a Japanese person or an Arab person speaking English, there's nothing really strange. But I feel like when you see like a white guy talking like Chinese, or a white guy talking Arabic, or a white guy speaking Urdu, people find that a little bit strange.
You know, that's actually something I've thought about from a really young age. Like that's something I think, because at a young age, I had a really close friend of mine, maybe my best friend when I was like 7, 8, 9 years old in primary school. I was a Greek guy, a Greek Cypriot, but spoke Greek at home and everything, called Lambros. And he was dark skinned, like he was brown, right? And I remember being with him and him speaking English perfectly, obviously, like, you know, raised in this country. He spoke Greek at home with his family. I remember thinking to myself, being maybe like 8 or 9 years old, thinking, well, why couldn't I speak Greek to you and you speak to me as if I was Greek? Because I speak to you as if you're English, Like you speak good enough English that I take you on face value, and I speak English to you. And I remember being on a holiday with my family and stuff, and thinking, well, why can't we speak their language? And then because I experienced my dad trying out speaking languages with other people when we were on holiday. Like my dad always did that, and people always just kind of took it as a very tokenistic thing. It was, oh, you can say hello, congratulations, and then they just say, oh, that's really good, and they just carry on speaking in English. And I wonder, well, why don't we ever do that? And obviously at that young age, you don't really understand things like, you know, imperialism. You don't understand things like that. You don't understand why there is like an English dominance, like in a language sense around the world. When I was 8 or 9, I didn't really understand that. But like I have thought to myself, like the same way that my friend Lambros is in my school and he speaks perfect English, like where are the white guys raised in a school in China who speak perfect Chinese, who are just among the Chinese? Like, and I wondered that, because like the way it actually works is when there are white people in other countries, they often in like expat communities and stuff, but they go to English British schools and stuff. So maybe they don't, but I thought that it was kind of sad that that's not really the case.
You know, here we learn French in school, but you know, it's so weird about learning French in school here. I learned French for like 7 or 8 years in school, maybe 9 years. All of my friends, everyone I know spent like 7, 8, 9 years learning French. I don't know anyone who actually speaks French. Maybe it's just in our DNA or something.
I know. Honestly, like because I come from a background of a primary school teacher. That was sort of what I started my career out as, and I wanted to go in teaching languages at secondary. And I remember thinking, like, we do not have a very good return on investment in our language education in this country. Like when you think, you know, as you say, like yourself and like everyone you know had to do French until they were 16 or whatever. And yet we have a whole population of people, like times your experience by the whole country, of all of these people who have had a teacher for 5 years, paid, you know, 40 grand a month or whatever. They've had all of this homework, all of these resources. They've paid thousands for the AQA exam or EdXL or whatever GCSE exam you did. It's like a multi-million-pound operation that's going on to come out with nothing.
Nothing, zero. Bonjour.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I mean,
s'il vous plaît.
Bonjour.
I remember computers, l'ordinateur. That's about it.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so like, so there's all of that for nothing.
Millions and millions for me to know like 3 French words.
Yeah, I know, and that's as I've described before. That's not a great ROI if you think about it from a business perspective.
Probably the worst ROI in the whole maybe history of the UK. I don't know.
I know, like loads of systems like that, like to do with the government and stuff, and especially like they're just kind of set up and people are getting paid for it. Like AQA are getting paid for it, the exam boards are getting paid to deliver GCSE French and German, and the teachers are getting paid to deliver the lessons, and the kids are sitting in the exams, and you know, because they're often graded on a percentage thing, like some years you could get 50% and get an A star or a 9 or whatever it is now, and like some years you get 60 and get that. Like there are still kids getting A stars and A's and B's, so let's just carry on. But I'm sure it must have some kind of impact on our economy generally, the fact that we're utterly useless at learning languages. It's kind of a bizarre thing. Like I've thought to myself, as someone who's kind of like an independent languages teacher who is in the position to create resources and bring better solutions to the market, I've thought to myself, like, you guys are on borrowed time, man. Like I've looked at the industry of teaching GCSE languages in our schools, and I've thought, man, an equivalent of me for French is going to come along and you guys are going to be in trouble because what you do doesn't work. No, believe me, we can all see it. It's as clear as day for most of us who've been to school here in the UK.
Do you know this word skive?
Yeah.
Skive, you have that in England as well.
Yeah, but I don't know if it means the same thing for you guys in Scotland.
For here, skive, for example, skive is a verb. It's an adjective, and I think it's a noun as well. I think it's a skive.
I only know it as a verb.
Okay, so we would say it as like French is a skive subject.
Oh no, not like that.
But I don't know if that's just us, right? It's a very informal word. So for any of the language learners who are listening, it's skive, and we understand that as, let's say, as a verb. You're at work. Someone says, "What are you doing?" And you say, "I'm skiving," and that's like you're not working. You're just chilling. You're looking at your phone. You know, like a customer comes up to you and says, "Oh, do you have this product in the back?" So you go into the back and you go into your phone, you scratch your head, you chill out. That's what we call a skive. And this person is skiving. But yeah, we know French is a skive subject. Like
Okay, so
French was
I've never heard it be used as an adjective like that, it being a skive subject or whatever. But when we say if you're skiving off, it means like, you know, you're not doing anything productive, right?
Yeah.
If you say that someone is a skiver, like if they're, you know,
okay,
they're
yeah,
not,
skiver. There we go.
yeah, we do use that.
So yeah, so we would call French a skive subject.
Right.
Like we would call religious and moral education a skive subject. Art was a skive subject, music was a skive subject, drama was a skive subject. We've got 5 subjects that we'd call skive subjects. We only did like 9 subjects, 5 of them were skives.
That's a problem, yeah. But like that's
the education system needs fixed. Some serious problems.
Because there are some subjects that I know some people who are maybe just gifted in them, they can kind of blag some subjects to a degree, right? Like maybe like studies of religion. I did studies of religions to A level, right? And like and I found it quite a hard A level, but for some people it was a Skype subject, right? And even like a really good friend of mine, one of my best friends, he did a degree in politics, but he's just a beast at it. Like he could just blag it really well, and he did for a lot. But like that shouldn't be the case for languages. You can't blag a language. Like if you go into a French exam and you can't make it up.
Yeah.
Like if I was just say to you, like, tell me what like a bottle is in French and like make it up.
It's impossible.
You know,
it's impossible.
Yeah, exactly. You can't just make up a language. Like languages shouldn't be. No subject should be a Skype subject. But how are we getting away with like generations and generations of languages students in this country who consider language as a Skype subject? And you know, even like I don't know if you remember me mentioning in a recent podcast I did that I didn't even do a GCSE in a language. Like I was one of the few people in this country who was so bad at languages that they wouldn't even let me sit a language. Like, me of all people, I'm quite good at languages. Like, you know, there are polyglots who are way better than me. I'm not saying that I'm like the highest echelon of linguists, but like, you know, if you were to line me up with most people you know and ask which one probably has a language GCSE, you might think it'd be me. So not only do we have a problem with delivering it and getting the results, we also have a bit of a problem with even supporting students who do have the potential to actually do okay in it.
Yeah, our education system is in dire need of some serious rectification because it's really just horrendous.
Well, I certainly think so for languages education, right? Like I remember being in like year 7 or 8, and they tried to teach me French. It's not entirely the teacher's fault. I was awful. Like I was just awful even at my own language. Like my spelling was always atrocious and everything, even in English, let alone in another language. But I thought like I would find this so interesting if I did PE in French. Like if I played rugby in French, that would be so cool. Like if I had to learn words for like pass and run and, you know, ruck over and, you know, drop goal. If I could learn words for that stuff in French, I was thinking like, why couldn't we incorporate into our education system something more applied?
That's
I know
a
the reason.
Really good point. That's
but
a
like,
really good point.
Like it is good. And especially if you could do that at primary, it would make a massive difference. But like part of the reason is because we just don't have staff who are trained for it. Like we very rarely have staff who can teach PE as well as a language, but we do sometimes. And if we're training people, if we're training teachers as we are already, like I don't know why we couldn't teach, if we couldn't train teachers to be able to teach in much more applied ways. Like it's especially true in primary school. As I said, I come from a primary education background, and we used to have a Spanish teacher come into my kids' class. I taught year 4, so for our international audience, that means like 8 or 9 years old. And like we'd have a Spanish teacher coming for an hour a week. Like how much do you think kids can benefit from a 1 hour lesson a week in a foreign language?
Yeah, of course.
Not a lot, right? Like I would,
minimal.
you know, I would say once again, the school hiring a linguist, even for her, that's not the best use of her time. Like that's her dedicating of her full-time job to not really benefiting her students at all. Whereas if there was a way of weaving Spanish into their day-to-day in a much more meaningful way, then that would be far more constructive. But it requires more training and stuff. It requires for training that's just better done, you know, and that's hard because languages aren't easy. Well, it's actually especially hard because all the people who are teachers now are the people who did a GCSE French like you and I and don't know any French. so it's come back to bite us.
Yeah. Let's go back to the Arabic. So let's talk about what some of the differences are between Arabic and English. And I'll start with this one. So in English, you have, well, I'll ask you, do you know how many tenses there are in English?
I'll just guess like 12, just because.
12,
just
bang
because
on, bang on, 12.
Really?
Exactly.
Oh, cool. I just say that because I've obviously learned some other European languages and it's about that. So I'll just guess at 12, which is
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of like this. You have past, present, future, but then here you have simple, continuous, perfect, perfect continuous. So there's not just a past tense. It either has to be a past simple, a past continuous, a past perfect, or a past perfect continuous. So that would be like I ate, I was eating, I had eaten, or I had been eating, and that's a system. Now, I find for, students, let's say Arab students, or when I was learning Arabic, Arabic has 3 tenses, and when I was learning Arabic, I would say to my friend Karar, who's my first teacher, I'd say to him, Karar, how do I say I have been learning Arabic for 9 months? And then he'd say to me, it's impossible because we don't have present perfect continuous. I said, bro, I didn't ask you what you have in the language. I just said, how do I say it? And then I started trying to like translate it myself. And I was like, I have been learning ana laday. And
Yeah.
I was like, how do I say been in Arabic,
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Like Arabic, not massively dissimilar to English in a sense, because we create different set tenses in English by using words like, have and had and was and used to, words like that. And Arabic has some ways you can do that, like by using kana and stuff as well to say used to and things like that. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the way you actually use the verbs, really, I'd go even further and say there's only really past and present, actually, because when we use the future in Arabic, we just put se or sawfa before a present tense verb. So, I go, adhabu, or I will go, sawfa adhabu. Like we actually, in terms of conjugation of the actual verb, there's actually only 2. And even those are they don't even line up with English. Like your friend's absolutely right that often when we think of certain ways to express things in English, Arabic just doesn't care. It has its complete own way of doing that. Like there's even a kind of a dichotomy between those 2 tenses in Arabic, not even to do with time, rather to do with certainty. Like you'll notice in the Qur'an sometimes, Allah might use words to describe the day of judgment and use a past tense verb. Obviously, the day of judgment hasn't happened yet, right? But he uses a past tense verb for it. And the reason for it is because it's certain, right? Just like the past is certain, right? We know that we can't question the past because it's happened, right? We can't say maybe it happened. It did or it didn't, right? So even in Arabic, like it's that the tenses don't even comply with our preconceived notions of them being tied up with time in another way, which is really interesting, isn't it?
Well, that's one thing I've heard about the Quran, is that the Quranic Arabic challenges the rules of Arabic grammar, but without breaking them, which is one of the things which make it like a masterpiece of literature. And, even more shocking for the people at that time, because, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was illiterate, and for him to produce such a book which was so dynamic and could challenge grammar in such a way, it just seemed like impossible. One other difference with Arabic, which I've still not wrapped my head around, is the pronouns. The pronouns are just, for me, like, so a reason the pronouns are difficult for me is because I'm not living in an Arabic country. Like, see, when I talk to, when I use Arabic, is when I have Arab students. So normally I'm only talking to one man or one woman. So the only pronoun I really need is anta or anti. But then you have all of these other ones, which for 2 men or for 2 women or for a group of men or for a group of women, or for like to say you 2 women who are right in front of me or 2 women who are like somewhere else. I found that system so confusing. How about for you? Did you have any like problems trying to convert your English knowledge into practical Arabic?
So strangely, especially in terms of understanding cases with Arabic pronouns, I found like having English background actually helped me in a way, because so this is something I love to do. What I'm about to demonstrate to you is something that with my English speaking students, I I love to do, because sometimes we think something so challenging in Arabic and then we realize that we actually have it in English in some way, right? So like in English, if we think about the pronouns I and me, okay, we think about I and me, they both mean the same thing, actually. They both mean the first person pronoun, right? They both mean this one, right?
Yep. Yeah.
But I and me are just different cases. Like in Arabic, what we'd call the I is the marfu', or the subject of the sentence. We say I am speaking, or I am drinking, or I am whatever, right? But I can't say me am speaking,
Yep.
or me am talking, you know, and it's exactly the same in Arabic between saying ana for me and ni if it's the object of the sentence, you know. You say ana ra'aytuka, I saw you, or anta ra'aytani, or you saw me.
Yep.
Right? So like I actually found in English, it's with pronouns, which is the best way to demonstrate what case is, because we have that difference between I and me, and we have it between she and her, and we have it between he and him. But yeah, I mean, so the difficulty I found initially before I really understood that was cases of pronouns. But the sheer volume of pronouns, because there's just lots of them. Like I think part of what you're saying is simply that there's pronouns like antoma, the two of you, and huma, the two of them. Like those are ones that we just don't have in English. So the sheer volume of them, like when you look at a list of them, you're talking about like 13. 13 different persons that Arabic communicates in, which is quite a lot. But certainly more. Like in English, we don't really do the plural, do we? Well, we have they, but we don't really have a word for like you, second person plural. We have one for like with we, don't we? But so Arabic, yeah, just has a lot that we maybe don't have in English. So yeah, I found that difficult, but as a teacher, it gives me some joy when I teach students about cases in English, because a lot of students come to me with preconceived ideas about what things are going to be really torturous in learning Arabic, and it gives me a lot of joy when I can show them that actually they use it in English anyway. That's probably one of my favorite ways to teach.
Amazing. So see, with me as an English teacher, I would say some of the things that I spend the most time on are tenses. Students need to spend a lot of time generally with tenses, especially these weird tenses which don't exist in their own language. And the like thinking of the past and the future, and then this is the present. Where is past perfect? That it's kind of here, but is it in this part, or where in this part was it? So explaining that to students, I think, is something they struggle with a lot. Another one is prepositions, because with tenses you can have like subject, for example, auxiliary verb, and then the verb, and you can actually show them it, and even though they don't understand where on the timeline it is, at least they can make sentences with it because they know what the structure of that tense is. But then there's prepositions, which are difficult, because it's like, well, where do you put a preposition? And then there's so many rules, like phrasal verbs, and then there's co-locations. Like, why do I say, I'm on the bus but I'm in the car, or I'm spying on him? Like, are you on him and you're spying? It's weird. And so there's I'd say prepositions and tenses are two really common ones which students struggle with, and like they always need help, or they're a lot of them will have mistakes with for a long time until they get the appropriate coaching. But what about for you as an Arabic teacher? Do you find there are particular things in the Arabic language which are just always difficult for students, or that you find yourself spending a lot of time talking about?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I would say unanimously across all of my graduates, they all say that there's one particular step in the Arabic in 60 Steps program that's the hardest: hollow verbs. They all say that. Like, I've not had a single graduate who's ever said that there's a lesson harder than hollow verbs. Like, just to explain in very brief terms, people who aren't sure what hollow verbs are, like, Arabic verbs tend to consist of 3 letters. In the most simple form, they tend to consist of 3 letters. And they've usually got like an a sound along them, like ka, ta, ba means he wrote, or je, le, se means he sat, right? And you'll notice that those are 3 consonants. You'll notice they're all like a qa, ra, a sound. They're all a consonant sound. Hollow verbs are verbs that have an elif in the middle. So they're verbs like qala. You only notice a consonant on the beginning and on the end, and then there's a vowel in the middle. Qala or kana. And firstly, just learning that they exist is even something that takes students a little while to get their heads around. And then the fact that elif isn't actually one of the root letters. It's actually a disguise for its real root letter. So in the case of qala, its root letters are actually qaf, waw, and lam. Hence the word qawl, meaning a statement. And from the verb kana, its root letter actually kaf, waw, and noon. So learning how that works and how you conjugate those verbs is a lot. Like I always thought that maybe learning the numbers, there's some quite funky grammar around the numbers in Arabic, and maybe even learning the dual, because we don't really have the dual in English. I thought those would be difficult, but yeah, it's kind of funny. Like my graduates, they almost all say that hollow verbs are the hardest, and it's a particular problem because they're so common. I mean, just those two examples I gave you, like qala and kana, between them are used about 3,000 times in the Qur'an. Wow. Like qala is used about 1,600 and something, kana 1,300 and something. Like together, if you think about that, if you think about the Qur'an only being about 600 pages, like qala and kana between them, just those two verbs alone, they occur like on average like every 5 pages in the Qur'an. Like they're that frequent, they're that important. So that's definitely one. And then, as you mentioned, like prepositions are one because they're kind of abstract, aren't they? Like I haven't thought about saying spying on someone. And even sometimes we might have a verb in English that the meaning changes loads with depending on the preposition. Like to look at somebody is very different to look after somebody.
Sure.
Like looking after somebody might not be anything to do with the eyes. Yeah. It might not have to do with looking at all. Like I can look after my wife or my kids by sending them money or by booking them a taxi or whatever. Like I'm looking after them in some, or ordering food for them or whatever, but it's not anything to do with looking. So Arabic's a lot like that. Like, you know, how in English, like in Arabic, for example, like to be addicted to something, you are mudmin an, you're addicted about it in Arabic, whereas in English, we're addicted to something, or in English, we laugh at something, but in Arabic, we dhahika min, we laugh from it in Arabic.
Okay.
So some of those things, or even if you're angry with someone, like in English, we're angry with someone, but in Arabic, it's ghadiba min, is to be angry from them. Someone, yeah. Which is sometimes, as you say, it's like, why are you angry from them? Like, what does that mean? And similar to how we say that you spy on someone, like you're not on them in any sense. Like, what does that mean?
In English, we call this contractions, and the thing is, there's not really rules to govern it. It's just they're just partnered together for whatever reason, the way we use the language. Is it like that in Arabic, that there's are there rules governing this, or is it just you need to remember that if you're like spy and on, these are friends which go together?
For the most part, like with my students, especially at the level students get to in my program, we just learn the prepositions with the verbs. Like I just put them in the vocab list with the verbs, and you learn them as the verbs go along. But at the very advanced levels of Arabic, there are books on what the prepositions really mean, and it actually has an implication on fiqh sometimes. Like let's say, for example, with the preposition min, min actually translates in English to either from or of. Right, and those can mean to you quite different things. Like I remember listening to a fiqh class when I was in Egypt, actually, about how there's that hadith on fasting the 6 days of Shawwal. You know that, like after the month of Ramadan. It's Shawwal after Ramadan, isn't it?
I don't know.
There's like the either way, right? Like, or is it Sha'ban?
Isn't Sha'ban before Ramadan?
Yeah, Sha'ban's on before Ramadan. I think it's either way, there's like 6 days in the month that comes after Ramadan. I don't know why I'm blanking on it, but 6 days. But anyway, I was listening on a fiqh class, and Imam Malik, he was of the opinion that the word min, when you say 6 days from that month, it doesn't mean they have to be of that month. It means they have to start from that month. So as long as you at least fast one of the days in that month, and the other 5 can be throughout the rest of the year.
Okay.
Right, but some of the other imams and some of the other schools of thought didn't understand min to mean from. They understood it to mean of. So that all 6 days of the fasting should be of that month. Do you see what I mean? So like there are books written in quite high levels of Arabic grammar on what these prepositions really mean, and there's even difference of opinion, as I say. Like some of the scholars considered it to be, considered with that particular hadith that the 6 days had to start in the month of Ramadan, start in the month after Ramadan, but could finish any time. And others considered it to be that the 6 days had to be of that month rather than from it.
Yeah, this is something which I think is really intimidating for English learners. Like a lot of people really freeze when they start to hear about phrasal verbs and collocations, such as, I think there's like 50 different ways you can use get, like get up, get to, get under, get over, get between, get beside, get by. And they'll have totally different meanings, because you can just take a verb and then you'd add, like look after or look at or look into or look up. These are all totally different. And for a learner, it's like, why is there not just one? Is it similar in Arabic? Like in English, we have phrasal verbs. So you take a verb and a preposition, for example, put up or put down or put into, or, it will blow over, or it blew down, or it blew up. Do you have anything like this in Arabic?
So a little bit. I can't think of many examples that are quite as broad as some of those that you mentioned, but that there are some verbs that can have a very different meaning. Like, for example, raghiba an, it means to dislike something, but raghiba fi means to desire it. So whether you use fi or an with the verb raghiba, the verb can mean something very different, just like that. Yeah. With the example of get, I mean, I know how challenging that is. Like, one of my graduates is an American, lives in America, and he was in the masjid with an Arab who sort of spoke broken English, and he thought that the verb adaraka, when Allah uses it in the Qur'an, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا لَيْلَةُ الْقَدْرِ, for example, like, and what will make you know what the night of Qadr is, right? That verse in the Qur'an. And this Arab who kind of had broken English thought that the verb adaraka means get, right? And that's kind of funny, because in American English, they're more likely to say, do you get it? Like, maybe this guy was under the impression that it kind of means, and that will make you get it. That will make you get what that power is, right? But so my student, shout out to Rashid, who's a fairly recent graduate. Like, he got back to me and was like, how do I explain this? How do I explain it? It doesn't really mean get. Like, and by the way, what does get even mean when we think about it? So it's kind of funny, because even sometimes English learners might experience a verb being used different in certain dialects.
So see with the Arabic in 60 steps, in what I've done of it, it seems to like just be fusha, right? And something kind of funny when students come to me is like, there's that, like, I teach students, like, I'll teach them the contractions, he has becomes he's, and whatnot, or he would becomes he'd, but I don't teach them slang. I teach them like to speak English very properly, so it can be used in like more professional manners. And plus, I think it's just good habit to speak in full rather than to contract. But see, like, some English, because see, another thing about these like real slangs is it doesn't just exist everywhere. A lot of them are very colloquial, like they just exist in Glasgow, or they exist here or there. So for this last little segment, I'd like to, if you've got some examples of way things get contracted in Arabic, and I can tell you some about I'll tell you about in like Scottish English, and maybe we can talk about Scottish English, where you're from in London or Cornwall, what contractions you have, maybe some in Arabic. So just for instance, right, like, I'll say something to you and let's see if you can decipher it. And I'll say it in the way Glaswegians speak.
Let's do it.
Juat chingi.
So is it, do you want something?
Yes.
Okay, do you want a
chingi?
Yeah, what on earth is a chingi?
It's like chewing gum.
Oh, okay, nice.
Do you want a chewing gum? Do you want a chingi?
Yeah.
Do you have one for me?
Yeah, so in Cornwall, they use a lot of them, but they're usually for very local things like place names and stuff. So like a place where my dad lives, St. Austell, everyone calls it Snozzle.
Okay.
They don't call it St. Austell. And a place called Mevergissi, which is close to the village where I grew up, they call it Gizzy. They just call it Gizzy. But one that's very Cornish is they directly. They say like they'll do something directly. It's kind of like saying doing it directly. But when the Cornish say they do it directly, they mean they might do it if they can be bothered. Okay. Like it's there is no time commitment whatsoever. It doesn't mean they'll do it directly. There's nothing direct about someone saying they do something directly. So there are kind of some like that. Arabic is kind of averse to that. Arabic doesn't really, in my experience, I can only think of one very kind of classical case where that might happen. So sometimes you might have two verbs that kind of get joined together to mean something. Like, as I mentioned earlier, like Arabic verbs tend to be 3-letter. We call these triliteral or thulathi verbs. So for example, the verb ba'athara means to kind of come out, and the verb athara, which I haven't heard that used actually in a while, but I think it means to kind of spread out. So we get this joining of them together. So you've got ba'athara, so there's an ayn and a tha at the end, and then athara, and they kind of join together to get the ba'athara. So you kind of have a contraction of them together, and ba'thara means to like be dispersed, like to come out and disperse. Ba'thara. Like you can use the term muba'thar for something being a bit chaotic. That's kind of an example how in like classical Arabic you can end up having a 4-letter verb in that case, ba'thara, or we'd say it's rather than quadriliteral in Arabic, they say ruba'i if it's quadriliteral. That's it's not quite the same because it's not colloquial.
There's not a step in the Arabic in 60 steps program for that one, is there?
So there is a step on quadriliteral verbs. We do it in maybe step 28 or something like that, maybe. But there's lots of reasons for having those verbs. So sometimes they're verbs that are borrowed from other languages, like the verb telfana. What do you think telfana means?
Telfala. Telefana. Something about phoning someone.
Need to telephone someone, yeah.
Telephone, yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
I just got that from comparing it to English.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, telefana, like it's obviously an imported.
Wait, I need to ask you one because I saw you made a video on this years ago. Isn't there a verb in Arabic that's like Hitler and he's acting like Hitler?
Yeah, so the verb hatlara is a real verb. You'll find it in the dictionary. Yeah, even not even. You don't even need to go to the big dictionaries. You go to the Hamza dictionary and you'd find hatlara in there. It is a registered verb in the Arabic language to be or to act like Hitler. And then some of those verbs are onomatopoeic. Like for example, like the verb hamhama, it means to hum something, or rafrafa, it means to kind of ruffle. Like a rafrafa is usually used with birds' wings or like flags. If like a flag is sort of
it's very onomatopoeic.
Rafrafa is very onomatopoeic. So those are the main reasons why you get these 4-letter root verbs. But I haven't found any 5-letter root verbs or 6-letter root verbs yet. There are words that have that many consonants in them, but it's not that they're verbs from that long.
Speaking of these kind of contractions, I suppose if they were to be anywhere, they'd probably be in the Arabic dialects, right, as opposed to Fusha.
Yeah, exactly. But even in dialects or in Arabic we call it Amiyya, like the everyday language. I can't actually think of any, but there must be though. Oh yeah, there are actually. Yeah, often there are ones used in Amiyya which are contractions of a few words in Fusha. So for example, you might have heard Arabs say things like ma'alish. Ma'alish means it doesn't matter, but it's a contraction of ma alayhi shay. Like there's nothing on it.
Ma'alihi shay. Okay.
Yeah, ma'alish. They end up saying ma'alish. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Or even a way that Arabs can say because, that people say like ashan, but that's a contraction of ala sha'n, like on the matter of this, or on the matter of this, yeah. And that ends up being ashan. So yeah, there are lots of them actually. I just hadn't really thought about them for a while.
I'll give you another couple in English. In Glaswegian English, right?
Okay.
He's mad with it.
He's mad with it.
Yeah. Do you have that? Do you say that in, I suppose, in London or Cornwall?
No.
All right.
No.
It means he's inebriated.
Okay. What does that mean?
Okay, it means he's drunk. Seriously drunk. He's mad with it.
Right. Okay. Cool. Okay, so there, I needed to have a translation of the translation. Cool.
I'll give you another one.
Yeah.
Go.
Do you know how to score a goal?
No. Do you want a square go? A square go is like, do you want to fight me?
Okay, right. Yeah. Okay, that's brilliant.
But this is stuff that's only in Glasgow. You know, even if I went to Edinburgh, they probably wouldn't know what that means.
Right. Okay, that's brilliant.
Cool, man. So I'll put all of your links in the bio, but could you give me a wee shout out for where you're active, where people can find you?
Yeah, of course. So all of my personal stuff is all Sam Martin Burr. That's all one word. That's my full name, Sam Martin Burr. So I've got a Sam Martin Burr podcast, YouTube channel, TikTok, Instagram, sammartinburr.com as well. And then my actual program, the Arabic in 60 Steps program, there's arabic-in-60steps.com. We're reopening that program on World Arabic Language Day, which is the 18th of December. So if this is out before then those guys can go and join the waiting list, inshallah, and be part of it when we reopen again, bigger and better than ever, inshallah. So those are the two things that people need to remember, though. It's just me personally, and then the program.
Great. So Sam Martin Burr and the Arabic in 60 Steps. All of your social media is in down below. But yeah, thanks again for coming on for our trilogy.
Thanks for having me, man. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise.